We are in Tehran, the capital of Iran, on September 19, 1976, just before midnight. General Yousefi, in charge of Miramat Airport, is receiving more and more calls. The people of Tehran are observing an object in the sky and reporting it to the authorities. But the radar screens show no echo. Yousefi leaves his office and confirms for himself that the object is in the sky. He then calls the Shahraki military base in Hamadan, 275 kilometers to the west. But the base's radar also detects nothing. He requests a fighter jet for reconnaissance. It is then 1 o'clock in the morning. Lieutenant Yadi Nazeri takes off in his McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom accompanied by a weapons officer in the back seat, then heads toward Tehran. But upon arriving at the scene and as he heads toward the object, the F-4 experiences jamming. Nazeri finds himself in the dark. Radar, avionics, radio, all the aircraft's electrical systems shut down at the same time. Unable to continue his mission, the pilot turns back, and as soon as his attitude becomes less aggressive toward the object, all his instruments turn back on. At 1:40, a second F-4 takes off, piloted by Lieutenant Parviz Jafari. When he also arrives near Tehran, he tries to lock onto the object with his radar and he locks it. The instrument indicates a distance of 27 nautical miles, or about 50 kilometers, and the signature of a KC-135. The American refueling aircraft. Except that a KC-135 doesn't light up like a Christmas tree. Indeed, Jafari states in his mission report that the object was emitting blue, green, red, and orange strobe lights so quickly that they all seem to be flashing at the same time. The F-4 then chases the object. Suddenly, Jafari sees a light streaking across the sky toward him. A missile. He then urgently begins an evasive maneuver and decides to retaliate with an infrared-guided Sidewinder missile. Subtitles France.tv access. But as he activates his weapons, he too experiences jamming from an unknown source and finds himself in the dark. And while he follows the area, he can see in the distance the object that was chasing him returning to the mothership. A few moments later, another object came out of it and headed at full speed toward the ground, emitting a light intense enough to illuminate the surroundings for several kilometers. Jafari, with his malfunctioning plane, decides to land in Tehran, which is nearby, rather than return to Hamadan, which is almost 300 kilometers away. And as he heads back to the airport, his instruments start working again. The next day, Lieutenant Jafari and his weapons officer take a helicopter to the area where they think they saw the object land, but nothing. Nothing except the transponder signal from an American transport plane and the testimony of people living near the area who said they heard a loud noise and saw a bright flash of light during the night. This is what is commonly known as the Tehran incident, one of the major cases of UFO encounters. It was taken all the more seriously because it was experienced by trained military personnel and supported by classified documents which were revealed following a request, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. However, this is AstronoGeek, the channel that has been explaining to you for years that a mysterious atmosphere and scary music are not arguments. And in the same way, what you just heard there, as my friend Sam would say, that was the convincing version. The problem with the story, when it's told by people who want to see something extraordinary in it, is that they'll focus on the elements that seem strange to try to convince those listening that it really is extraordinary. And if we take a look at the elements that are too often left out when this story is told, first, something that might seem a little strange to you. What are Iranians doing with American fighter jets? And how can we have so many details about this story? Why do we find it in declassified documents thanks to an American law when it's a story that concerns the Iranian Air Force? Well, because we're in 1976. Today, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the sworn enemy of the United States. But in 1976, we're 3 years before the Islamic Revolution, and the country is still called the Empire of Iran. At that time, the Shah, yes, that's what we call the Emperor of Iran, was an ally of the United States, who helped him gain power to stand up to the Soviets and the Islamists. The corruption of the regime and the excesses of its internal security service would create growing opposition, leading to protests and then riots. The Shah refuses a violent response, which could escalate, but since the police don't have non-lethal weapons like tear gas or water cannons, the unrest gets out of control and ends up being violently suppressed. This is Black Friday. The whole situation escalates into a deep destabilization of the country. The Shah leaves to seek safety in Egypt, but this departure will ultimately become an exile. Ayatollah Khomeini takes power, establishes the Islamic Republic, and in response to that, the Republican regime is a bit like that of Groland. You know, where everyone can vote, but only the president can run? Well, in Iran, the Ayatollah becomes the supreme leader. First, with that name, you can really feel what a democracy this is. He has control over the army and the security services. A president is elected for 4 years, but the supreme leader has veto power over the candidates. During the same period, the Shah falls ill with cancer. He is welcomed in the US for treatment. The Islamic regime, which wants to execute the Shah, has his family hunted down and declares the United States the great Satan and the enemies of the revolution. And Israel too. Because they are Jews, the American embassy is stormed and its occupants are taken hostage. The regime seizes the documents found there and ransacks the building. Well, after that, things just keep getting worse. The Americans try to get support from Saddam Hussein to stage a coup and overthrow the Ayatollah. It fails. Anyway, it's a mess. All that to say 3 things. First, before 1979 and the revolution, the United States were allies, provided equipment to Iran, and were present in the country. This is especially convenient for the CIA, which was then at the doorstep of the USSR. Then, the American documents from the embassy, which were seized by the Islamic regime, including CIA reports, resulted in several documents concerning the 1976 incident we're interested in today being lost. And finally, beware of revolutionaries. When a country is destabilized, usually it's those who are the most ambitious who take power afterward. And it's rarely meant to be shared. But I digress. So we have a few declassified documents, and generally when a document is classified, it means it contains some juicy stuff. In 1976, Iran had 225 McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantoms sold by the United States, and the United States was working closely with Iran's military. After the incident, the Iranian military invited a US Air Force representative for a debriefing. It was Lieutenant Colonel Olin Moy. The notes taken by Moy were not considered sensitive enough to be classified and were published shortly afterwards in an American ufology journal. But at the same time as these notes, Lieutenant Colonel Olin Moy wrote an article in the US Air Force Security Service's quarterly bulletin. However, this service requires security clearances. So the bulletin is classified by default. I mean, whether there's sensitive information in it or not, just to avoid any doubt, the bulletin is classified by default. And so, when its declassification was requested in 1981, all it contained was, well, the same thing as the public notes that had already been published but written properly to make it the editorial of the bulletin on the topic of jamming and interference. There you go. The UFO phenomenon is still often sold to us with the claim that the military is hiding ultra-sensitive stuff. But have you noticed that every time we get our hands on it, in the end, well, there's nothing? Well, but beyond the fact that in this story there aren't any secret documents to reveal any juicy details, there's still the account of the events. which is still rather unusual. Or not. Yes, sorry, but that was the romanticized version as it was popularized in 1994 by a sensationalist TV show about UFOs. Now we're going to stick a bit more to the actual reported facts. But before we start, if you're still here, can I make a suggestion? Subscribe. Because at this point, if you're still watching my video, it's probably because you like it and I have a bunch more in store. So to not miss them, go ahead and subscribe. So let's continue, but sticking to the facts as described in the report. Our story actually begins shortly before midnight on September 19, 1976. General Yousefi does not receive a flood of phone calls. He receives 4. Residents of Tehran who call do not see a craft or an object in the sky. Yousefi and the Tehranis who called all described the object in the same way. A stationary point in the sky similar to a star but much brighter. However, if you look at an ephemeris for that date, you immediately notice the presence of Jupiter in the sky that evening. This explanation, surely too simplistic in the eyes of ufologists who want to believe in the presence of an extraterrestrial craft, was refuted on the grounds that Jupiter was not in the right place in the sky. Indeed, Jupiter was in the south and the aircraft took off toward the east. Yes, to reach Tehran, 275 kilometers to the east, where the object was expected to be found. But the observations in Tehran were indeed made to the south. Damn, what mental gymnastics people are willing to do to deny a fact. It's crazy. Then, I can't help but notice that the description given by the pilot of the second F-4, namely an object flashing all colors at once, looks a lot like this. That's the star Sirius, with way too much zoom and completely out of focus, twinkling because of atmospheric convection. When it's out of focus, you can see nearly all the colors clearly. So, of course, if you know a little about my channel and astronomy, you're going to tell me that planets don't twinkle. Of course. But in the sky near Jupiter that night, you can find Capella, Aldebaran, and also Betelgeuse. 3 stars, admittedly less bright but twinkling, and that the pilot, under stress, could have mistaken for Jupiter. You think that this time I'm the one twisting things to deny the obvious. Wait for what's next. Because the next part of the story is that the F-4 gets jammed as it approaches and everything on board shuts down. I told you that the United States was very present in Iran at that time. It turns out that technicians and engineers from Westinghouse and McDonnell Douglas were there as well. During the official debriefing, the pilot of the first F-4 Nazari was absent, and there was no report either indicating a malfunction of that first aircraft. The McDonnell Douglas engineers are reported to have received a malfunction report only for the second F-4, not the first one. So, a story where all the approaching planes are neutralized is appealing. But a story where the first pilot goes out to investigate, sees nothing, returns, and only the second one gets jammed, that doesn't work as well. Especially since the second plane takes off 10 minutes after the first. So it's not an F-4 that flies 600 kilometers there and back just to be replaced by another one because it's broken down. It's 2 planes that take off almost at the same time. You'll also notice that up until now, I've been talking about jamming, but there's no mention of jamming in the various available documents. The term jamming was introduced by the sensationalist show from '94. Why? Because when you say jamming, it implies a deliberate action by someone, and jamming, well, that's not what this is. Here we're talking about shutting down all the electrical instruments of an aircraft. Remotely. That's not nothing. It's actually totally out of technological reach in '76. So, well, that implies it's the work of an unknown technology. Except that the technicians at McDonnell Douglas are certain. The second F-4 that was sent was known for its recurring electrical failure problems. And the base personnel were also notoriously known for their inability to fix the problem, because they called in the engineers from McDonnell Douglas to do it for them. And that's not the only thing they asked them to fix. Remember, at this point in the story, the first F-4 actually has nothing. and the second one, before its total failure, picks up an object on the radar. The radar shows him an echo at 27 nautical miles with the signature of a KC-135. Except that's not the case. That too is an invention of the TV show. The F-4's radar, which is a primary radar and only sends back an echo, can't tell what it's facing. It only picks up an echo with a certain intensity, and it didn't lock onto anything at all. But like, never. The thing was also completely messed up, just didn't work, including during other flights before the incident, and had to be fixed by the engineers from McDonnell Douglas. Another thing that's not insignificant, the pilots and weapons officers sent that night had never flown at night before. This night interception flight is the only night flight they flew while stationed at the Karaoke base. By the way, in his report, the US Air Force officer states that the pilots had trouble landing because they couldn't adjust their night vision goggles. And because they had never flown at night, that gives us an interesting clue about what happened next, namely the missile fired by the UFO. Indeed, that night the meteor shower was also at its peak, and it was the end of the Draconids. Meteor showers, which are known for not being very numerous, but they can be very bright, that's a Draconid. Now, imagine you're aboard your beat-up F-4 during your first night flight that's supposed to be an interception of an unidentified aircraft, and you see that go by. So, you might tell me that maybe he saw a meteor passing through the sky, or maybe not. Except, well, he wasn't the only one. That night, a meteor lit up the sky and was reported all over the Mediterranean countries as well as in Iran. Meteors are notoriously known for causing completely inaccurate reports about their actual distance. Witnesses always describe the glow as landing very close, behind the mountain, behind the hill, and so on. Some even go there hoping to pick up a nice meteorite, while the meteor is burning hundreds of kilometers away. But since it often moves at 10 or 20 kilometers per second, its speed makes it seem like it's very close. In fact, it's pretty funny because there are quite a few reports where experienced pilots on night flights have suddenly performed evasive maneuvers when they saw a light appearing to streak toward them, mistaking it for missiles or simply other planes, when in fact they were just shooting stars. And so, when the next day the pilots did a reconnaissance flight in a helicopter, the fact that they found nothing except witnesses who also said they saw a light in the sky and heard noise in an area where fighter jets had flown by at full speed. And so, the fact that they picked up the transponder of a transport plane at the same time is actually not very interesting. Let me sum up. We're in Tehran, the capital of Iran. On September 19th, 1976, just before midnight, General Yousefi, in charge of Mehrabad Airport, receives 4 calls. People in Tehran see a steady light in the sky where Jupiter is located. The radar screens show no echo. Yousefi leaves his office and sees for himself that a star is brighter than usual. He then calls the Chaharoki military base in Ahmadan, 275 kilometers to the west. But the base's radar also detects nothing. Surprising. So he requests a fighter to be sent for reconnaissance. It is then 1:30 in the morning. Lieutenant Yadid Naziri takes off in his McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom, accompanied by a weapons officer in the back seat. Then he heads for Tehran. This is their first night flight. But when he arrives, Naziri doesn't see anything. And nothing special happens. 10 minutes later, Lieutenant Parvi Jafari's F-4 arrives with his weapons officer, and it's also their first night flight. And the radar, which we already know doesn't work, locks onto something at 27 nautical miles. The F-4 then chases the object. Suddenly, Jafari sees a light streaking across the sky, like a whole bunch of other witnesses scattered across hundreds of kilometers. He then urgently begins an evasive maneuver and decides to respond with an infrared-guided Sidewinder missile. Except that the electrical system of his plane, which regularly cuts out. And while he's fleeing the area, he can see the bright fireball falling toward the horizon in the distance. Jafari, with his plane malfunctioning, decides to land in Tehran, struggling a lot because he's never done a night landing before. The next day, he and his weapons officer take a helicopter to the area where they think they saw the object land. But well, there's nothing there except witnesses who saw the glow and heard the roar of the fighter jets. The end. And as usual, when you dig a little deeper, you realize that the most fanciful elements of the story didn't exist or were presented in a way to make them seem fantastic. Studies conducted by JPAN on the reports they receive reveal that more than half of UFO sightings turn out to be the Moon, Venus, or Jupiter. An airport commander doesn't receive any training in astronomy, and a fighter pilot who has never flown at night isn't any more informed. This story doesn't contain any truly extraordinary elements. Just a handful of coincidences, and not very exciting ones at that. And yet, the Tehran incident is considered today as one of the most important UFO stories because of the amount of information available and the fact that military personnel were involved. Basically the usual recipe. If military personnel are involved, the story must be true. If documents are classified, it must be important. If pilots say it, they can't be wrong. But the military are just regular people who enlisted. We classify just about anything and everything. And a rookie pilot who's never flown at night or has no particular knowledge of astronomy and who's also under stress won't be any better at identifying Jupiter or a meteor than Aunt Tatooine at her window. Visits from alien spacecraft to Earth would be really great because of the implications it could have for interstellar travel. But even if I hope it's true, I'm not willing to believe just anything that would support that idea. So I have to sort through UFO stories to rule out mistakes, and the Tehran incident has all the hallmarks of a false lead. It seems more reasonable to dismiss it. So while waiting for a better story, look up at the sky, keep it astronomical. And see you at the review.